I refuse to let this experience be nothing but negative.
Mm.
I am going to consciously choose to extract the maximum positive outcome from myself and for others from what I've gone through. And that concept, it applies to that, but I've taken that through every dimension of my life. So it's not I failed, that's it, it sucks and wallowing in that. It's I had a challenging experience. How can I squeeze all the juice out of that and use that to do something that is positive and effective for me, that I fail forward instead of being stuck and I slide backwards.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Athletes Class Podcast. I'm your host, Shaun Boyte. Ever since the very beginning, the vision for Athletes Class has always been to cover the entire timeline of an athlete, whether you're a 7-year-old learning how to fail for the first time to a 28-year-old trying to figure out what your identity is after sport. Today's episode dives into that exact transition, the moment that an athlete decides what's next. Ian Rice, a former D1 javelin thrower from Cal Poly, joins us to talk about his work helping athletes navigate one of the most challenging moments of their lives, the day sport ends. Ian's story is one of adaptability, of resilience, and reframing failure. From switching sports and setting records to facing real loss and learning to bounce forward, Ian shares how he's turned every setback into data and fuel for what comes next. This episode explores the fear of failure, building confidence through systems, and one of the best visualization techniques you've never heard of. As always, grab that notebook. This one's packed with lessons for athletes, coaches, and anyone facing their next chapter. Let's go. So good to have you on the Athletes Class Pod, man. Thanks for being here today.
Shaun, I'm super excited to be here. I got to say, I am a huge fan of what you're doing with the athletes class, and I wish I had some of this stuff back in the day. Would have been real helpful. So more people need to hear about it. And yeah, I'm very excited.
Well, I could not feel more the same in that same strand of thought about what you're working on right now. With the book that's almost ready to be published in the world. It's coming out here in a couple months. So close. You're at the very end, but the college athletes interview playbook will be hitting the shelves soon. But before we get there, that's almost at the end, and I'm really excited about it. But Ian, there was this moment that you stopped competing, where you hung up your cleats. Describe that moment and what you felt mentally and emotionally when you knew it was over for good.
Oh man, that was the hard part. Well, there's a couple dimensions of that. I think the moment I knew it was over was actually the second. So I was a javelin thrower at Cal Poly, and the second my last javelin throw left my fingers, as I saw it sail away in the air, I thought, well, that's it. There it is. That's the end. And that was, there's that story of I think it's Heart of Darkness, but not with a bang, but with a whisper. It ends not with a bang, but with a whisper, and that's kind of what it felt like. It was so many years of effort and focus and just day after day grind, and then it was over. And at that point, I was a little relieved because I was quite injured my final year. I had a my shoulder was taped. I was covered in Tiger Balm. I had 2 back braces on, and I duct taped them together because I needed that much support that day. So in that moment, it was I was like, okay, thank God. But as I reflected on it, it was it's a really challenging point. And I think what I tried to do was look forward and say, in the pain of the loss of my identity as an athlete, I tried to figure out, well, what is the next field? What's the next challenge I can go focus on? And I threw all of my emotion at, how do I go win at the next thing?
When you've had a couple of transitions, was there ever a point at which you grieved that loss? Like, was there a moment, or do you ever look back at that, or do you feel refreshed and you were excited about the next challenge?
A week after the last meet, me and a couple other guys went down to the beach, started a bonfire, and we gave our cleats, my javelin spikes, and then another thrower his shot put shoes. We gave him a Viking death, so we burned them in honor of that's it, it's done, it's over. So that was cathartic for sure. But I think one of the hardest things as an athlete that I've found is letting go of that identity. And I think the piece for me has been how do I stay competitive? I still tell myself I have some morning affirmations I always do, and one of them is I am an athlete. I'm fit, I'm ready, I'm
Mm,
strong. And I think that you're never not an athlete. It's just a question of what are you competing in now. And so
mm,
whether that's in sport or whether that's in sales or whatever your field of competition is, I think that's the transition to make. It's a hard one for sure. I've spoken with a lot of athletes who, you miss the fire of
yeah.
the battleground, and I think we'll always keep searching for that. But I think the important part for me is to just continue to say I'm still an athlete. It's not like I don't get to be that anymore. It's just figuring out how do I transition my identity from I competed on the track to now I compete in the office or wherever that may, or I try to be the best parent I can be or whatever that is. I think that's it's pushing yourself to be the best is consistent no matter what.
I have a two-part question now. You
Yep.
suggest that there's this natural bridge between the mental preparation that it takes an athlete to be elite and what is required in a high pressure corporate environment. So the first question I have is, can you break down what the mental characteristics you believe are useful in both high pressure athletic performances and corporate settings? And then can you explain why you feel like athletes struggle to make that transition between the two fields?
Yeah, I got to take notes. This is like an interview right here. Uh, so part one is what does it take to succeed in the corporate environment like that? I think it's the common traits that athletes have, right? I think you have the ability to work hard and push yourself. You have grit and resilience when times get hard. Humor under pressure is another big one. There's always going to
Um,
be stress. There will always be and if this is your bucket that you can fill, there is an endless amount of work that can fill that bucket at any time forever. And it's figuring out how can you remain both resilient but also positive in those moments of pressure. And then self-belief, I think, is the other piece. Continuing to believe that I can do the thing, I
um,
can achieve the goal, I can get that person who's 10 years ahead of me who I'm thinking to myself, how on earth am I ever going to be able to run a company that's $20 million dollars or whatever that is, believing that it's just a matter of repetition and time that got them from where you are to there. So I think those are mindsets that I would say that really matter in the professional world after sports to be successful. I think the second part of your question is where do athletes struggle in making that transition? I think the first and biggest thing that I see, especially in the students that I work with, is not understanding their unique advantages being an
mm,
athlete. And so what I mean by that is I'll talk to a lot of students that say, well, how can I possibly get a marketing job when I've been a comms major and I've been on the football team versus someone who is a marketing major and they've been doing this the whole time. And I think the reality is it's less about that you are this or that major, and it's more about your unique set of experiences and skills and how you can translate those from an athletic conversation to a corporate conversation to talk about I didn't just lead the team to success when our key player got injured. I was able to step up in a high pressure moment, be a leader, rally the team, and focus us on our core goal, which was winning that game. I think
yeah.
that there's a lot of ways to reframe what you've done to say you're not just a dumb jock. You are a high performing, intelligent person who has a lot of characteristics that these companies are looking for. And it's simply a matter of distilling that down to the core stories that you have and being able to tell them in a unique and interesting way.
You wrote something the other day on LinkedIn that I thought was super interesting. And it's about this idea of storytelling. It's about the idea of framing. About the idea of going in and being prepared with multiple, stories that you can refer to depending on what the question is asked.
Yep.
Why do you feel like storytelling is so important to getting a job or translating or to be honest, in general? Why is
Yeah.
storytelling
Yeah.
so important?
Totally. Well, I think for a couple of reasons. I think just from a I don't know if it's a sociological or anthropological, but as humans, we are wired for stories. It's in our DNA. If you go back generations and generations, people would sit around the fire and tell stories to each other. That's how knowledge was passed from generation to generation. I think that's part one. I think part two, as you bring that forward, stories are also how we organize information in our brains. They're how we make sense of the chaos and randomness of the world. So when you put that into a corporate setting, you have a lot of students, one of them being myself back in the day, where when I went to go prepare for my transition out of sports and into the corporate world, I went and Googled the 100 top interview questions, and I decided I'm going to memorize all of them. I'm going to make a answer for every single one of them. And I did. I had a notebook. I'd write one down. I'd come up with an answer. I'd practice it in the mirror. I'd record it. And then I'd move on to the next one. I think I made it through probably 60 or 70 of those before my brain tapped out and I had to go to bed. Then I made it to the interview, and in the interview, as soon as I got a question, I couldn't remember which question with which answer. And then when I got a new question that wasn't on the list I'd memorized, I couldn't think because I was spending so much time memorizing everything there. So on the candidate side, it helps you reduce your cognitive load under pressure to remember stories because they happen to you and you have an
Yeah.
emotional connection to them. On the interviewer side, the other part of that is it's way more memorable to hear a story than to hear the 27th time somebody said, my biggest weakness is I work too hard. Your eyes glaze over, you stop paying attention. It's no longer interesting. But to hear the story about, my story was how I nearly killed my college professor while he rode our prototype tricycle at a business competition. That's a much more memorable thing. And so now
Yeah.
you're the guy like, oh, the tricycle guy, as opposed to candidate number 500
Yeah.
who said they worked too hard.
There's this moment. I forget the exact details, but a guy that I went to high school with, he was a couple years in front of me, ended up being on The Bachelor like 15 years ago, like when The Bachelor was just started. And they always got out of the car and they
Yeah.
introduced themselves to the woman. Well, he came out in costume. He came out in this big, I don't even think it was, like, he didn't bring in the limo. He brought in some horses and he got out and it was like this thing. Well, he ended up making it to the final four, but his idea was that same concept, right? Like, I don't want to be just, one of 30 guys who got out of the limo and said, hi, my name is, so-and-so. I want to be the guy who makes an impact, finds a way to be humorous, finds a way to make a memory, some connection. And that's what it feels like you're saying. Is that kind of right?
100%. Yeah. And I think one of the other dimensions, as you kind of relate this back to sport too, is that I think as an athlete, you struggle to sell yourself because your performance is your proof, right? Like if you
Yeah.
go out there and you score 30 points, you don't need to say anything. You scored 30 points. As opposed to face to face with somebody and all they have is a resume and the conversation
Mm-hmm.
and the way that you make them feel, there's a lot more other elements where you have to advocate for yourself and it's not your performance isn't there because like how do they know what you can or can't do. And so I
Yeah.
think understanding it's the same thing, but you have to advocate for yourself a little more, and one of the ways to do that is to be memorable by telling a story in the same way you might, hey, I'm the guy who shakes the ref's hand after every game, right?
Yeah.
I'm the guy
Yeah.
who when the team is down, I am the one who's rallying them back. I'm not yelling that we need to do better. I think they're similar concepts, and you're just figuring out how can I apply that to the right dimension at the right time.
I love that. I love that a lot. Similar in that same vein, you talk about the psychological differences between performance under evaluation versus performance under competition, right? So this idea of like somebody doing a one-on-one and having a direct line with you versus competing against a leaderboard, right? So help me understand your approach or your suggestion or your advice to making interviews more like competition.
Yeah, well, I think first off, you need to treat it the same way you treat a game or a competition, and I think that comes down to systematic preparation. So if you're leading up to a championship game, you're going to have your warm up, you're going to do your stretching routine, you're going to have if it's soccer, you're going to pass and then you're going to do some one-on-one or some kicking or some drills. And then once you're in the game, maybe you have a little saying that you say to yourself at kickoff. You have a motivational conversation at halftime. Like you have a game plan, and it's a series of systematic preparation that you've built, not just in that, but leading up to that, right? Your conditioning, your weightlifting, what have you. The same thing applies to a corporate setting in an interview is bringing that same concept of systematic preparation in order to ensure the likelihood of successful outcome. And so the way that I teach to do that is through a combination of it mostly how do we reduce the cognitive load under pressure and then engineer ways to ensure we have an unfair advantage against other candidates. And as an athlete, your unfair advantage is your athletic background and all the stories that you have that are probably a lot more interesting and in depth than a chemistry lab that someone else might talk about. And so being able to understand what are my core stories, what are the most common interview questions they can answer, and then adding there's some polish on the front and back as well. So things like how do you bring energy and enthusiasm from the first moment the conversation happens? Uh, there's some specific tactics about you're always going to have time for Q&A at the end of a conversation. Let's be prepared for that. Let's have 10 questions written out in a notebook before you go. So you don't have to spend any time memorizing that. You just flip to the notebook page and say, can I ask you some questions? Awesome. And then you can read them off there. So it's the concept of systematic preparation. It's the same thing you do in sport. It's just taking that and applying that in a corporate setting.
I'm a huge fan of the idea of systems. You had something somewhere, I forget where it was, where you talk about what it takes to build confidence, right? Can you tell us about where confidence comes from? It feels like it's related to what you just said.
Yeah, totally. I think confidence comes from one, self-belief, and two, repetition. And I think when you combine those two things together, that's where you get confidence. And so it's sort of an interrelated loop. The more at bats you have at something, the more data you have to learn from, the better you can be, the more belief you have that you can do the thing. And that's sort of the repeating loop. And so I think the dimensions that I think about when I think about how do you ensure better confidence coming into a high pressure situation like an interview or a high pressure situation like bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, 2 strikes, bases loaded, is it's repetitions beforehand. And I think that the thing that a lot of student athletes who do end up transitioning into the corporate world don't do is they don't think about it in that way, and they don't think about how can I get more repetitions at this whole new area that I have not even thought about because I've been so focused on sport for the last 5-6 years, or your whole life really at that point. It's about how do we get more at bats and repetitions. And so building that into a system of slowly building a base foundation and then layering on bits of polish on top is how you build some of that self-belief, which ideally you should be able to bring because you've been a high performer in one area. You can do the same thing in another. It's just a matter of building the foundation beneath it.
I think that's maybe the question that I have, is how to build that confidence, which to kind of, I feel like to summarize is like, well, confidence is built on the idea of being prepared and having systems in place and feeling like you've prepared for, whatever it is in front of you, whether that's through experience, whether that's through preparation in a different way without the experience. But for you, in a world in which a college athlete or a high school athlete is now going into a career, how do you feel like you develop that preparation or the confidence when you've never done something like that before? Like what's your strategy or your advice to somebody who's never been in an interview or maybe has just done one or two of them? How do you approach your first go at this thing?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways. I think we've touched on the systematic preparation to build the system against it. I think the other two, something that I did a lot was just some self-affirmation aspects. I'm big on positive thinking. I was a big Tony Robbins guy back in the day, still am. And so I think there's a dimension of engineering or forcing the belief into yourself through journaling, through speaking in the mirror, etc. I used to use I think it's a Dan O'Brien quote of, um, I will not stop, I will not rest until my best is better and my better is best. I am a champion. And so I would journal that every day, every night, still do. I think so. That's so kind of forcing the affirmation into yourself, having the system. I think the other part is mentorship. So finding people who've been there and done that and getting their advice. There are tons of people who are super willing to help, myself included, with the whatever the transition you might be looking for. So find someone who's been there, who's been in those shoes, and go
Yeah.
ask them for advice and feedback on how to get there. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. People are willing to help. It just takes the courage to go make the ask to say, hey, I want to get where you are. Can you help show me the path?
Who was your mentor? Tell me a little story about somebody who along your path, whether it be in high school as you transition from soccer, to track, whether it be in college, whenever you transition from 400 to the javelin. I mean, what a journey that you've had, setting records, in high school and, being on the leaderboard at Cal Poly in the javelin. Tell me about somebody who helped you through each one of those steps.
I think the people that have helped me through the biggest journeys, one is my family for sure, right? My mom and my dad. My dad's been a huge John Wooden fan, and so would always adapt his lessons to whatever he was teaching us from the time we were 10 years old. One of those big lessons is adaptability is the key to survival, which was huge for me in terms of every big transition that I made, whether that was, in high school, I was a soccer player and we won state and I was the all-state defender of the year, and but I didn't play club. I didn't try to get recruited until after my senior season. And all the team said, you look great. We got a team already. So if you want to walk on, you could do that. And that didn't sound interesting. So I always knew I was fast. I did track. So I adapted to figure out how can I go get a scholarship. I went and did track. I got lucky. I got a scholarship. I broke the school record, etc. Now I'm at Cal Poly. I'm a 400-meter runner. I'm the tallest guy in the 400-meter squad by a couple inches, and I'm also the heaviest by about 30 pounds. And so I quickly realized I was fast for high school. I'm not fast for college. And so I thought to myself, okay, adaptability is the key to survival. How do I find the next thing? I saw him throw a javelin. I was a pitcher and center fielder in high school before I only did track senior year. So I said, hey, coach, I think I can do that. Uh, they weren't too keen on it. They let me do it at the end of the day when the marching band was practicing. And first meet at UCLA, I got smoked in the 400, but I also qualified fourth in javelin. And so they said, okay, cool. You can go be a javelin thrower now, which then turned into, okay, I need to throw javelin. I put on 25 pounds of muscle. You also have to be super flexible. So I'd stretch an hour after class and after weightlifting. I think, and there's a lot more kind of to where that story finishes, but I think as far as mentorship goes, throughout that, my parents, my father, my mom were always kind of the meta mentors, and then within each stage, I went and sought somebody specific. So
Mm.
when I transitioned to javelin, I had my coach Jack Hoyt, but I also was very fortunate to have individuals like Ryan James, who was the school record holder, who came and coached me a little bit, and then Karen Smith is I think a 4 or 5 time Olympic javelin thrower in the women's side. Then going into the corporate world, same thing. It's like, how do you go find individuals who have been super successful? And so I was very intentional after college in finding individuals that had been athletes or had the same athlete mentality and were willing to show me what good looks like and then help me get from A to B, help me go from where I'm at to what good looks
Yeah.
like then. I think that was always really important. And then in between there, I leaned on college professors too. Like I was the nerdy guy that sat in the front of the class. I took notes. I went to office hours. And I think what I found is that the college professors are there because they care and they want to help you. Go talk to them. Go use them. I built an amazing friendship with Dr. John York was one of my mentors and still a good friend to this day. So I think between my parents, I went and sought additional coaches. In school, I went and sought teachers and leaders who could help me. And then in professionally, I'm still doing the same thing. I'm looking for people 4, 5, 6, 7 steps ahead of me and asking them, you're where I want to be. How can I get there?
There's humility that comes with that. We always hear about a beginner's mindset? How do you continue to have a beginner's mindset? For you, when you go seek some mentorship out, when you go find somebody who is 6, 7, 8 steps ahead of you and wherever you want to go, what's your approach? How do you approach them? I'm just thinking about it from a high school and athlete's, perspective, saying, well, how do I go find that mentor? Or what is my message to somebody who I feel like could be helpful to me? What are you saying to them? How are you approaching, that conversation?
Yeah, I think the key is just start small. Don't go up to someone and say, "Hey, tell me everything I should do for the rest of my life to make me successful or to do the thing." Like that's too much pressure. Put yourself in their shoes. If you start small with like one small question, "Hey, I
Mm,
noticed you did really, really well at X. I'm having this problem doing that. What's like two tips you'd have for me, someone in my shoes?" And then you can build a conversation from there. I think starting small and focusing on what's a small, unique thing that you can do is a really easy way to have a conversation with someone who is probably a lot more busy and has a lot more things going on than you do. That's always a good way to start. And I think the second piece is the remembering that other people want to be helpful.
mm,
Other people want to help you succeed. So don't be afraid to ask, because
mm.
you'd be surprised how many people would jump at the opportunity to give you some advice, because in their minds, they're getting to help a younger version of themselves. And they're
Yeah.
thinking, "Oh my God, I wish I had this back then. Let me tell you everything."
Yeah.
Which is often how I react when I get asked for feedback. So that's
No,
what I
that's
think.
great. I love that idea of the perspective of somebody who's young, thinking about it from the whoever's older's perspective. That idea that says a lot of people, not everyone, you're not going to meet every single person you're going to ask a question to isn't going to be like eager, to
Yeah,
offer it, but
yeah,
there are a large percentage of people who are like, not only do they want to help you, they want to see you succeed, and they're going to try to do everything they can to make that happen. And
yep,
I've run into that a couple of times along the way. I'm like, wow, you're being extremely helpful. And it's like, well, they actually want to see a younger version of themselves, or, a young person succeed. And that's a really good perspective and a way to say that. Um, one of the biggest topics that you have lived and continue to research, and we've talked about it kind of throughout this conversation, but it's about preparation.
sure.
For you, if you were to dial us down, I'm going to try to get like into the cliff notes, but when you look at or see the word preparation, what are some of the most valuable skills you feel like you found that help you walk onto a track and field, help you transition from the 400 to the javelin, and then also help you prepare to walk into a corporate setting, whether it be into an interview or whether it be into day one of work?
I think the biggest thing is distilling down what are the core elements that matter. I think in any endeavor, it's easy to get caught up in a gazillion other details that don't matter, right? And a simple example anyone can relate to is like weightlifting. Everyone wants to go take supplements, but at the end of the day, it's like, did you get your right calories in? Did you get good sleep? Did you drink enough water? And then did you actually do the workout? And like if you do those four things, it doesn't really matter what supplement you take. We'll leave steroids out of this. But in terms of those four, that's it. And so figuring out what are those first principles dimensions of the thing you're trying to do, right? In in track, it's ensuring that you're ready to show up for the next day, which means you got to get good sleep, you got to stretch, you got to recover, and then you got to push yourself in the workout. I think track's unique in that you're kind of redlining consistently every time you do
Mm,
something. In javelin, it's a little bit different. In javelin, you can't go throw a javelin 100 times at maximum capacity. Your arm will rip off its socket. And so it's
mm,
it's distilling the technique down. And so you do a lot of technique work. How do we work on our block? How do we work on extending your arm up more with flexibility? There's a lot more technique work, right? And so those are your first principles concepts. I think in in a corporate setting, is in an interview setting, your first principle concepts, which is kind of what I go about in the book, is, hey, we don't need 100 questions. We need answers to The number one interview question, so tell me about yourself. We need answers to the three whys: why this industry, why this company, why you? And then we need answers to what I call the Big 10 interview questions, which are the distillation of the most common interview questions that you'd get. It's like the 80-20 out there. And so through that, you need 10 stories. You don't need
Mm.
100 answers. You just need 10 stories. And if you can figure out what are my 10 stories, put them into a short anecdote that is compelling and interesting, and then there's a couple other polished pieces, show a tell item, make sure your camera setup is great, make sure you have energy and enthusiasm. That's all you need. You don't need a gazillion details. You don't need the most crazy answer to your strengths. You just need some basic principles. And with those, you'll get big outcomes.
When you prepare for something,
Yeah,
let's just call it, you know, you prepared for this podcast, right?
sure.
Which of all the guests that I've had on, you may be the one who's prepared the most, right? That's,
Okay.
I'm gonna just in terms of your thinking,
Okay.
because this is just a conversation,
Yeah.
that and we're talking about the mental and emotional side of the game through perspectives of these guests, the guests who I have on. For you, maybe the question is less how did you prepare and more how did you handle the unknown, right? So when you prepare, there's going to be an unknown. There's going to be an unknown question. There's going to be an unknown conversation for
Yeah.
you. And you talked about with adaptability. How are you adaptable? How do you prepare for the unknown?
It's a great question. Yeah, I've had to work on that. I was always the guy who I got frustrated with last minute asks because I was like, well, I can't get everything ready and perfect for that. I think it's two dimensions. I think I try to think about I hold myself to a high standard. And so I expect myself to perform at the highest level in whatever it is. And so in thinking about that, I ask myself, what is it going to take to perform at that high level? And then I start to work backwards from there. So for a podcast, as an example, this conversation, the first thing I did was, well, I better go listen to some of his podcasts and understand what are the questions he's going to ask. What's a good guest like? What's a bad guest? And then from there was, okay, what are some of the talking points or stories I might want to share on this conversation that would be interesting, that'd be useful to an audience, etc. And then from there, I probably should take some notes on those so I don't forget them in the moment, right? So I've got notes on things I want to say. So I think for me, it's holding yourself to a high standard and then trying to reverse engineer what will it take to get there and just going step
Yeah.
by step until you get to the point that it says, okay, we're ready to go. Something I would always do to the same end in sport, and I've also done in my professional career, is reverse visualization. Forward visualization was always a struggle for me. It was always hard for me to go from the point of like here and then to success. But I found that if I went past success and then worked backwards, it was so much easier, and I actually had a higher rate of doing the thing I was thinking about. And so for me, in javelin, as an example, that was imagining the phone call to my mom or dad the next day about, hey, I did so well, I threw this far, etc. And imagining I'm on the call, the positive feeling in my chest, etc. And then working backwards to, okay, what did I think? How did I wake up that morning? Backwards to how did I sleep that night? Backwards to how happy was I that evening? What did I eat for dinner? You know, excited on the bus ride home from the track meet, the feeling of joy right after throwing, to the point of throwing, to then warm-ups, so that all the way back to where I was sitting and doing the visualization. And so that meant I just watched the whole movie. I just got to go do that now, as opposed to I have to invent a new outcome. The thing's already happened. I just
Yeah.
need to take the steps back on the path I just outlined. So I think that's also another thing that I've done, whether that's an interview, whether that's a big presentation, whether that was in sport. I think reverse visualization is also a tool I've used a lot that I think has been really successful.
Did you pick that up from somewhere or did you just invent that? Because that's epic. I love that idea. I love that
You
idea.
know, I will cautiously take credit that I invented that, but I'm sure I'm not the first person to do that. I think it's something that's worked for me and that I've taught to a lot of other people, that it helps with you're trying to imagine the big thing and you're worried the big thing won't happen. Well, let's pretend it already happened and then
Yeah.
just go backwards. And I think it
Yeah.
overcomes a lot of that fear and the resistance that people have.
Oh man, that's just like so key. I feel like I've done that without like subconsciously, where you like see the outcome you want and then you work backwards. But I love the idea of doing that consistently and making that part of your routine is to say, okay, I'm going to sit down right now and instead of visualizing the moment, I'm going to visualize the moment that's after that and then work my way back, scraping backwards,
Yeah.
going through each one to this exact moment. I love reverse visualization, which I'm going to coin as an Ian Rice saying moving forward.
Yeah, man.
um, so one of the last things I want to talk about is this idea of failure. And you kind of had written about it a little bit, but one of the biggest challenges we have, I've said it before, I'll continue to say it, is that fear of failure in youth sports is one of the biggest reasons why kids quit sports. They're afraid of failure with themselves, of their peers, of their parents, of coaches. And they say, okay, I'm no longer interested in coming up against that idea of failing and failing and failing and not really being comfortable with it. When you think of failure or rejection, what's the key idea behind building resilience for that failure and then moving through it?
Yeah. It's a big topic. I resonate with this topic a lot. JV baseball, my freshman year, it was literally at bottom of the seventh, whatever the last inning is in JV. 2 outs, bases loaded, down by 4. And so I walk up to the plate thinking, oh my God, this is it. This is the moment that everyone talks about of like, you're supposed to do the thing. You're supposed to win the game and hit the home run. And I was so stressed out about being the guy that did the thing. First pitch grounded out to second. And then fast forward, the other team gets up, they get bases loaded, guy hits a grand slam to win. And I'm like, he did the thing. Why couldn't I do the thing? And that was uh, in some ways the beginning of the end for me in baseball in terms of my self-belief then. I think fast forwarding, what I wish I had known then that I don't, that I know now, is that the reframing failure or rejection or whatever that is, and it's simply data. It's simply data to feedback into, okay, how can I learn from this the next time around? What can I do differently? Instead of thinking I failed, you shift to my system needs refinement. What can I do differently? What can I do better? What can I change? And so, in going back to my younger self, I probably would have said something to the fact of, Ian, how many times have you practiced bottom of the seventh, bases loaded, 2 outs? How many times have you practiced that? And I would have said 0, none, literally never. So how can you expect yourself to suddenly magically come up in the moment with this game-winning home run? Like you can't. Don't put that pressure on yourself. Instead, just focus on strikes, balls, and put the ball in play. That's all you need to do. I think that's point one. I think point two is that as humans, we are way more resilient than we realize, and you can get through way more than you'd imagine. I had a particularly challenging experience my freshman year of college. I was recruited late. The dorms were full, and so I lived off campus with 2 guys that were training professionally, and then me and another teammate who was also recruited late. His name was Maury. And Maury was a decathlete, and I was a 400-meter runner, and we became fast friends. Uh, he passed away my 4th day of college. So the first Thursday of the
Wow.
first week of college, he passed away, and that was a very traumatic experience for all of us. And
Yeah, I bet.
I nearly quit the track team. I nearly dropped out of college,
Yeah.
and I'm eternally grateful for my mom, who I remember sitting in the car, staring at the track, and saying, "No, I'm not going. That's it. Like let's go home. Let's pack our bags. Let's drive back to Tahoe." And she said, "No, Ian, you worked your butt off all summer, the last 4 years to be here. Don't throw it away on this one thing. Don't give up. Like you can do this. You're stronger than this. Get out there." And I did. And I think one thing that I took from that, which relates back to the the learning from failure, learning from rejection, or learning from trauma in this case, is as I said to myself in journaling about a week or two later, I refuse to let this experience be nothing but negative.
Mm,
I am going to consciously choose to extract the maximum positive outcome from myself and for others from what I've gone through. And that concept, it applies to that, but I've taken that through every dimension of my life. So it's not I failed, that's it, it sucks and wallowing in that. It's I had a challenging experience. How can I squeeze all the juice out of that and use that to do something that is positive and effective for me, that I fail forward instead of being stuck and I slide backwards.
mm. Yeah, one of the concepts that we have, or one of the anchors in athletes classes, bounce forward, fail forward, bounce forward. The idea that like we don't bounce back. Bouncing back is coming in and coming back to where you were. Bouncing forward is taking where you were when you failed and taking that data and then moving forward. It's interesting the way that you describe trauma as a way to the way you described that was, I'm going to take this experience that was incredibly devastating for me and try to squeeze every moment out of it to make the next step, the next thing I do better, take the next right step. And I love that idea of taking whatever it is, failure, rejection, trauma, devastation, and saying, okay, great, I'm still here. I'm still kicking. My feet are on the floor. How do I take all of that and move forward, bounce forward, fail forward? I absolutely, right on so many ways. Thank you for sharing that. You have this goal of helping 10,000 athletes
Yep.
launch their careers after they're done competing. Any specific reason why you chose 10,000?
Yeah. Well, so that's a great question. 10,000 athletes. And the way I think about it is getting into your first big boy, big girl job. If we assume an average salary of $100,000 plus or minus 10,000 times 100,000 is $1 billion in corporate career income generated. So the goal for me is that actually, but putting $1 billion everywhere just sounds like I'm crazy and I don't know what I'm talking about. Anchoring it in 10,000 students is what's exciting and motivating to me. That's how I got to that number. But then I think as I can go and apply that, the butterfly effect of what would it be like to level up that many students, and how much would that butterfly effect happen throughout the course of their careers if they started 3 levels higher than they would have. And so that's one of the things that's driving me as far as the book and the coaching and the courses, and I hopefully will start a podcast at some point also. That's really where that comes from.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is there one piece of the book that you're really excited about, that you feel like, oh man, this chapter, this thought, this theory, this system, that you feel like, man, that's the thing I continue to return back to, the story I love to tell? Is there one thing about the book that just excites you, and gets you going every time you talk about it?
There's a lot. I think it's funny, the first publishing a book has been a very interesting process. The first version of this was full of memes and photos and pop culture references, and through working with an editor, I'm realizing like I can't use those and I don't have licenses to those, and the rights I'd have to pay $1 million for. So whittling it down to just my words and my ideas, I think the core thing I keep coming back to, and we've talked about it a lot on this, is that the every single human has a unique and interesting story to tell. It's simply a matter of finding a way to unearth that, to dig that gold out from within yourself. And I walk through a very systematic way of doing that, of let's just mind map everything out. And then we start to refine that by looking at, okay, what is interview appropriate? What is going to answer some of the core questions? And then which ones of these are I call them all stars? Which one of these can answer 5, 10 questions on their own and you can adapt them? And if you get 4 or 5 of those that can answer 5 different questions each, you only got to remember 4 or 5 stories, but you can answer up to 20 questions. That's an entire interview. And so I think that's the core of it, is everybody has really interesting and unique story and set of stories to tell. It's simply a matter of finding them and refining them so that you can deliver them under pressure, which you will do because it happened to you. You were there. You just got to speak your truth.
Your book is called The College Athletes Interview Playbook. It comes out early next year. Everybody get yourself a copy, especially the college athlete who's looking to make that transition to the corporate world. Ian, such a pleasure having you on and spending time with you today. Thank you so much for everything, man. I appreciate it.
Shaun,
Thanks for
thank
coming
you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
on. All right, man.